Hello, grade fours. Today we are going to finish reading Thank You, Mr. Falker by Patricia Polacco. Okay, but before we get started, I want you to think about the predictions you made yesterday. And while I'm reading the picture book, I want you to think about your predictions and see if you were right. Does Thank You, Mr. Falker end the way that you thought it would end? Let's find out. Mr. Falker would stand behind Trisha whenever she was drawing and whisper, "This is brilliant! Absolutely brilliant! Do you know how talented you are?" When he said this, even the kids who teased her would turn around in their seats and look at her drawings. But they still laughed whenever she gave a wrong answer. Then, one day, she had to stand up and read, which she hated. She was stumbling through a page in Charlotte's Web, and the page was going all fuzzy when the kids began to laugh out loud. Mr. Falker, in his plaid jacket and his butterfly tie, said, "Stop! Are all of you so perfect that you can look at another person and find fault with her?" That was the last day anyone laughed out loud or made fun of her, all except Eric. He sat behind Trisha for 2 whole years, but he seemed almost to hate her. Trisha didn't know why. He waited by the door of the classroom for her and pulled her hair. He waited for her on the playground, leaned in her face, and called her "Toad!" Trisha was afraid to turn any corner for fear Eric would be there. She felt completely alone. The one time she was really happy was when she was around Mr. Falker. He let her erase the blackboards. Only the best students got to do that. He patted her on the back whenever she got something right, and he looked hard and mean at any kid who teased her. This Mr. Falker sounds like a pretty good guy, don't you think, grade fours? But the nicer Mr. Falker was to Trisha, the worse Eric treated her. He got all the other kids to wait for her on the playground, or in the cafeteria, or even in the bathroom, and to jump out and call her "stupid" or "ugly." And Trisha began to believe them. She discovered that she asked to go to the bathroom just before recess. She could hide under the inside stairwell during the free time and not have to go outside at all. In that dark place, she felt completely safe. But one day at recess, Eric followed her to her secret hiding place. "Have you become a mole?" he laughed, and he pulled her out into the hallway and danced around her. "Dumbbell, dumbbell, miggity old dumbbell." Trisha buried her head in her arms and curled up in a ball. Suddenly, she heard footsteps. It was Mr. Falker. He marched Eric down to the office. When he came back, he found Trisha. "I don't think you'll ever have to worry about that boy again," he said softly. "What was he teasing about, little one?" "I don't know," Trisha shrugged. Trisha was sure Mr. Falker believed that she could read. She had learned to memorize what the kid next to her was reading, or she would wait for Mr. Falker to help her with a sentence. Then she'd say the same thing that he did. "Good," he would say. Then one day, Mr. Falker asked her to stay after school and help wash the blackboards. He put on music and brought out little sandwiches as they worked and talked. All at once he said, "Let's play a game. I'll shout out letters. You write them on the board with the wet sponge as quickly as you can." "A," he shouted. She wiped a watery A. "8," he shouted. She made a watery 8. 14, 3, DMQ, he shouted out. He shouted out many, many letters and numbers. Then he walked up behind her, and together they looked at the board. It was a watery mess. Trisha knew that none of the letters or numbers looked like they should. She threw the sponge down and tried to run. Oh no, poor Trisha. But Mr. Falker caught her arms and sank to his knees in front of her. "You poor baby," he said. "You think you're dumb, don't you? How awful for you to be so lonely and afraid," she sobbed. "But little one, don't you understand? You don't see letters or numbers the way other people do, and you've gone through school all this time and fooled many, many good teachers." He smiled at her. "That took cunning and smartness and such bravery." Then he stood up and finished washing the board. "We're going to change all that, girl. You're going to read. I promise you that." Now, almost every day after school, she met with Mr. Falker and Miss Plessley, a reading teacher. They did a lot of things she didn't even understand. At first, she made circles in sand, and then big sponge circles on the blackboard, going from left to right, left to right. Another day, they flicked letters on a screen, and Trisha shouted them out loud. Still other days she worked with wooden blocks and built words, letters, 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 words, 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 always sounding them out. And that felt good. But though she'd read words, she hadn't read a whole sentence. And deep down, she still felt dumb. And then one spring day, had it been 3 months or 4 months since they had started? Mr. Falker put a book in front of her. She'd never seen it before. He picked a paragraph in the middle of a page and pointed at it, almost as if it were magic, or as if light poured into her brain. The words and sentences started to take shape on the page as they had never done before. She marched them off too. Slowly she read a sentence, then another, and another, and finally she'd read a whole paragraph, and she understood the whole thing. She didn't notice that Mr. Falker and Miss Plessley had tears in their eyes. That night, Trisha ran home without stopping to catch her breath. She bounded up the front stairs, threw open the front door, and ran through the dining room to the kitchen. She climbed up on the cupboard and grabbed a jar of honey. Then she went into the living room and found the book on a shelf. The very book that her grandpa had shown her so many years ago. She spooned honey on the cover and tasted the sweetness, and said to herself, "The honey is sweet, and so is knowledge, but knowledge is like the bee who made the honey. It has to be chased through the pages of a book." Then she held the book, honey and all, close to her chest. She could feel tears rolling down her cheeks, but they weren't tears of sadness. She was happy. So very happy. The end, boys and girls. Okay, thanks for listening. Now don't forget to complete the activity that goes along with this lesson. It is attached in the Google Classrooms. Okay, have a wonderful day, grade 4s.